Welcome, everyone. And thank you, Meredith, as always, for organizing this webinar. I am one of the Glacier and Sea Level co-leads, along with Joe McGregor and Caitlin Harbeck. My name is Zoe Corville, and I'm at the Cold Regions Research and Engineering Lab in Hanover, New Hampshire. I'm a research engineer there. And we have, today we have two talks centered around navigating the new Arctic program. We have Kate Ruck, who is a program manager at NSF, representing the Arctic program, as well as Kirsty Tinto, who's going to talk about one of her NNA projects that we're super excited to learn more about. We have the group, I think, is small enough today that we could go around and have everyone introduce themselves. If you're up for that, we can go ahead and do that. So I'll just, Meredith, do you want to help me facilitate that, or should I just pick people?
Yeah, no, great. That sounds wonderful. I can help facilitate. I will also just go ahead and pause the recording so that, yeah.
Okay, great. First up, Kate Ruck from NSF is going to discuss some of the updates with the NNA program.
Great, thanks. So thanks for the introduction. I am a working group member for NNA, but also a program officer for the Research Support and Logistics Program with the Arctic section in the Office of Polar Programs with Frank. And thanks, Frank. Appreciate you. I will keep it pretty brief here today and leave some time for questions that I'm sure people have. If we can go to the next slide. But yeah, first I thought it'd be good to provide just a brief overview of the history of the program. If you attend staff meeting for IARPIC, I think this may be a little familiar from last month, but I think it just helps to give some context. So in 2016, NSF launched an initiative from the director's office called the 10 Big Ideas under Dr. Franz Cordova. And this was a drive for NSF's long-term research agenda and to seek avenues for new investment from Congress. The Navigating the New Arctic was originally conceptualized as one of the 10. And in the first few years, the awards that we made were pretty small. They were workshops or RCNs or eagers to support just smaller efforts, and we were using mechanisms like Dear Colleague letters and any funding that could kind of be scraped together from directorates that were interested in this big idea within NSF. And so we had mostly gained interest from the geosciences, the engineering, and the social, behavioral, and economic sciences directorates, and that kind of actually shaped the future directions of the program in the early days. In 2019, we entered a 5-year period of dedicated funding at $30 million a year, with the first full solicitation being published. And so the Navigating New Arctic working group is made up of members from different disciplines that span the foundation. The working group is made up of biologists, engineers, educators, computer scientists, social scientists, and natural scientists. And in the beginning, the working group pulled on the theme of convergence, which was another NSF big idea, and created a program that can be illustrated by the Venn diagram that's kind of down in that corner. The NNA Venn diagram highlights the deep integration needed to fulfill a convergence approach. So we were really striving for NNA awards to clearly articulate the intellectual and scientific contributions from either engineering, social, and/or the natural science methods and theories. This means merging different disciplines to solve important research problems at the intersection of the natural environment, built environment, and social systems. I think we were always interested in cultivating a new research community that could tackle kind of the pressing problems in a rapidly changing Arctic. And then realizing this community would need support, we put out a solicitation for a community office and were able to fund the current Navigating the New Arctic CO, which Twyla is part of, in 2021. We really appreciate the amazing work they're doing with this group of researchers. And it's something that we are just so glad that we invested in. But we are now in our last year of dedicated funding and are looking to NSF leadership to help define the future of NNA. So we can go to the next slide. And to that point, Alex Eisern, who is the head of GEO, recently released a Dear Colleague letter addressing the end of the current NNA solicitation. We had set it up to be recurring, kind of hoping that there would be a path forward for the program in the future. But this DCL kind of marks the sunsetting of that, and this solicitation will go into the archives. So the letter highlights the important contributions the program has made in the realms of convergent science, community engaged research, and co-production of knowledge, while also informing recent federal priority documents. But it also reaffirms the point that all of the big ideas were slated to end in FY23, and also emphasizes that $150 million over 5 years is an amazing investment for the foundation to make in this type of convergent Arctic research. Could we go to the next slide? So the DC also kind of highlighted a few practicalities of kind of how the program will be operating in the near future. So this was the last year of the solicitation, and we received proposals, and we are currently working to make a final set of awards for this fiscal year. And so the way NSF works is that we, kind of award a proposal, and proposals last anywhere from 1 to 5 years. But there will be active research and kind of money dedicated to finishing awards. For some of the 5-year awards, that means that'll extend into 2028. So active projects that are funded through the NNA program will be continued to be managed by a team of NSF program officers, and will be keeping kind of continuity in that space from the beginning of the program as well. We are working with the NNA Community Office to continue to serve as an important resource for all NNA projects and community members for several more years. I think currently they're in their 2nd year of funding, and we are working on ways to kind of extend that cooperative agreement to support the awards that we are currently making this year. And then the annual PI meeting kind of will remain a requirement for all active awards. So we can go to the next slide. But ultimately, there's no dedicated funds for NNA outlined in the FY 2024 budget. There are discussions at NSF leadership about a new effort to build upon the work of NNA, but I don't have any insights to offer currently about what that would look like or when it would be in place. So in the interim, the Navigating the New Arctic Community Office had recently included an item in their newsletter that highlighted several core NSF programs that would be good fit for proposals looking to build upon the work started in the Navigating the New Arctic program. We kind of created this page initially to highlight places that people could apply to for working in community engaged or co-production of knowledge research. And we still think it's a very valid resource for PIs looking to kind of bridge funding until a new effort's identified to kind of support NNA PIs in the future. And I can drop some of the links to these resources in the chat as well. And I think that's all I have. We can go to the next slide. And I'm happy to answer any questions people have kind of about the DCL or kind of how we're moving into the future. And I'll get the links for the DCL as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Kate. It looks like Jack has a question. He got his hand up.
Yeah, just a point of clarification, Kate. You mentioned that if there are any research awards, research project awards selected this year, that they would ordinarily go out until 2028, the 5-year NNA research awards, and possibly have another extension. And that you were looking to try to keep the community office going, but it sounded like it wasn't clear how long the NNA CO would exist, that it might not be as long as 2028, or did I misunderstand what you were saying?
Well, so the current community office was funded in 2021 and it was set to run for 5 years. So that's, you're gonna mess me up on my math. So it's 3 years short of kind of if we were to make 5-year awards this year. And so we are looking into mechanisms, and if it's been finalized. So I think that's I'm not trying to overpromise, but it is something that is a high priority for us as a working group. And then I think for everyone in the geosciences directorate as well. Yep. And I put the link to the DCL there, and then I'll also bring up that resource page that kind of highlights other programs that I think would be good fits for people to build upon their NNA work with.
Any other questions for Kate while we have her on the hook here? All right.
Yeah, and as a parting, I'll say the working groups, work together for at least, the very least until oh, thanks, Val. I appreciate that. We're, to the end of this fiscal year, and then we have the NNA at nsf.gov that we are always kind of actively monitoring, and are happy to answer people's questions through that venue as well. So if you think of something that you would want answered later, just feel free to reach out, and a member of the working group will get back to you.
Okay, great. So if there are no further questions, we can move on to our next speaker, who's going to discuss her NNA project. Yeah, we're really excited to learn more about this and appreciate you being available. So if you want to go ahead and start, Kirsty, thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. I have all sorts of introductions to make. One of them, I'm Kirsty Tinto. I'm normally based at Columbia University at Lamont Doherty, which is just outside New York City. I am presently actually visiting Fairbanks and have a really dodgy internet connection at my accommodation. So I'm speaking through the telephone, so you're never going to lose my voice, even if you lose my video. And Meredith has my back with the slides, and thank you for that. But I'm speaking on behalf of a pretty big team of our Navigating the New Arctic proposal that started in 2018, so one of those big awards. And it's a collaboration between Columbia and the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources. And is that beeping me or somebody else?
I think it's you, but I'm not totally sure.
I think it might be Scott.
Are you hearing it?
We are.
Let me just go ahead and mute everyone who's not muted except.
Sorry. It seems really.
Yeah, I think that's Scott Harper's. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. And so we're working with the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources, who are based out of Nuuk and have been throughout this award. Let's go to the next slide. So the purpose of this award was to merge those different systems that Kate was talking about in the context of sea level change around coastal Greenland. And sea level around Greenland is different from many other places in the world. I guess all places in the world have different sea level situations going on. But for a few physical science reasons, sea level is falling around Greenland. And our question was to figure out how we can merge large-scale models of sea level change that can predict that with small-scale, community-scale needs of why does that matter? for this particular coast, and to bridge the gap between those two questions with some observations of a mapping of the seafloor around the focus communities that we're working on. Next slide, please. It's just to illustrate the systems that we're talking about. So for the sea level change part, and yeah, we can go on to the next one. Maybe you're there already. I've got photos around this. Excellent. So on the left-hand side, you see that we have the large-scale models down at the bottom. We've been installing tide gauges because that's a place where we're a bit observationally poor around Greenland. In the bottom right, I show you some of the bathymetry surveys that have been conducted using GINR's research vessel, the Sana. And up top, top right is some of the community meetings that we had to sort of scope out what these surveys should be. There's also, because we've been working alongside those communities, there's been a big STEM education push to try and engage with integrating STEM education and finding out how people respond to their own coastlines in the places that they're from. And the focus communities that we wanted to work with at the start were the 4 that are on the map here. But in fact, with the circumstances that we faced over the last few years, we've just been on the west coast. We've looked at Ruck and Asiat and Nuuk, which have all slightly different situations. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So this is going to be a 3-parter that will grow, but just talking about what sea level is doing around Greenland at the moment. So you know, I imagine that the Greenland ice sheet is loading the lithosphere and pushing it downwards. So as it melts, the load is lessened and the lithosphere rebounds. So the land is rising literally around Greenland. There's a secondary effect that as you lose, as the Greenland ice sheet loses mass and reduces its load, it reduces its gravitational pull on the surrounding sea level. So the sea has sort of been stacked up around the Greenland coast in attraction to the ice sheet. And as it melts, the sea is also lowering itself. So the land is rising and the sea is lowering. And we can combine knowledge of those 2 effects in the next slide, please, to try and make predictions in the near term of what sea level will do, because we see pretty different uplift rates up that coast of Greenland. And the things that are variable between like different times, the predictions that we can make are sensitive to the ice volume change since the last glacial maximum and how well we know what that is. The predictions of future ice loss, which are different at different latitudes of the ice sheet and different with different emission scenarios. And then the structure, the strength, and the rheology of the Earth and how it varies under Greenland. So if you go to the next slide. And maybe we have, yes, excellent. So this just shows kind of how those uncertainties play together. The 2 plots that I show here are predictions for what sea level is going to do in Asiat, the latitudinally center of the 3 times that we've looked at. The blue and the red lines are low emissions melt scenarios and high emissions scenarios, and the uncertainties around those are in the envelope that's shown. And you can see that there's quite a difference between them. But the 2 different plots show how these play out under different mantle viscosities. So a lower mantle viscosity will cause the Earth to rebound more rapidly and more. And so you see more dramatic effects in the near term if you assume a different mantle viscosity. So this has been a really interesting convergent project because we're talking with the fishers and the municipalities in these towns, but we're also integrating pretty cutting edge models of the solid Earth geophysics to try and make the models meet the individual needs of communities. So it's been extraordinary. Next slide, please. One of the things we've done, and I mentioned this a little bit in the summary, was to put in a few more tide observations. This has been challenging as well, but we have a tide gauge that's installed in Asiat at the moment. We had one in Ruck that got damaged, and so we hope to reinstall it. but you can see from the plot on the right that the red line is the modeled tide, and the the black dots are the observations from one of these instruments. So even a month of observations is improving the near-term tidal understanding in this area. And if the gauges stay in place for long enough, then they can start contributing to our understanding of long-term sea level change. Next slide, please. So I alluded to the fact that we were talking with communities. Yeah, perfect. And this is just an example of how that happened. The field component of this project was happening at the height of the pandemic, and it really highlighted the value of the partnership with the institution in Greenland, because they went out and made the community meetings that scoped out what the surveys would be. That meant that conversations could happen in Greenlandic, which really helped. We missed out on a lot, but the survey planning, I think, was very strong. And the conversation in each of the towns was, how are the waterways used here? Where is the water shallow? And where would changes in sea level be important? And so you can see some of those conversations happening in that slide. I think I've frozen, so please skip on to the next slide. And I can show you how the bathymetry surveys worked. So we had 3 different phases of mapping. One was sort of mid-depth, 100 meters to 800 meters in the GINR vessel Sana. Then they would charter a boat to do a shallower mapping to get us right into the areas where there's going to be a strong percentage change with sea level change in the next 100 years. And then there's ground truth that is basically by a drop cam, looking at the benthos and finding out who lives there and what the substrate really is. Another side effect of the fact that the US team couldn't travel at this time was that there were berths open on the vessel, and so there were some grad students from Greenland who were able to take our place and accomplish that work, and that was really amazing as well. So I'm going to show you how this process worked through in Asiat, that middle town, and I have really once and for all been thrown out of the Zoom, so I'm just going to try and get that to start working on letting me back in. But I hope that you might be on slide bathymetry surveys Asiat.
Yes.
And so, excellent, thanks. Asiat is a port town. It's got a fishing industry. It's on the edge of Disco Bay. It's also the area, it's kind of an archipelago. It's a very shallow water area, and one where we might reasonably expect that there will be significant impacts of these changes in the future. In the planning conversations, a couple of things came out really clearly. One, that there were known shallow seaways, interior seaways that are safer routes to travel, but that are currently only passable at high tide because they are so shallow. And another, we had reports of rocks within the harbour that didn't used to ever be emergent and are now emergent at low tide that weren't before. So we have eyewitness reports of the sea level lowering in this area, which is consistent with the geophysical measurements that we've been making. And we wanted to be able to basically quantify that landscape well enough so that these fancy models that we're making can be useful, because if it hasn't been mapped to the level of precision that we're modeling, then it's very difficult to apply the models at all. So we'll go to the next slide. This would have had an animation. Oh, it still does. Excellent. So this is the survey plan that came out of those conversations. Each of these places shows a use or a value of a particular, or an interest of a particular part of the area. And if we go to the next slide, then you see the mapping that we did over that area. So we managed to map not all, but all places nearest to the town and in the major use areas and nearby settlements. And then the next thing is to come and understand this landscape. And we want to understand the human interactions with it, and we want to understand the ecology of it. So step one, and this is the next slide, is to map the habitat that's associated with this bathymetry that we've mapped. So we have acoustic bathymetry from the ship. We have the backscatter that came from that tells you about the properties of the substrate. And we have those ground truth points. And Diana Kozik, who's at GINR, has made a habitat map for us based on the depth, the slope, the morphology, and the substrate of the landscape. Then on the next slide, we also wanted to keep our contacts in ASIAT in this conversation as we begin to analyze these data. And so the grad student on the project, Casey Brayton, made a story map that describes the project for us, but also shows that data set really well. So the QR code in the corner brings you to it, or brings you to the story map that has this web map installed. And here you can go about the landscape. You can click at the ground on the ground truth points, and you can see what the seafloor actually looks like. So we have people who really know this. I say landscape. It's a seascape, the submerged landscape, but haven't seen it before in this way. And it's been really good to be able to make these data accessible, because otherwise, particularly the imagery data, can be quite cumbersome to share. So for the next slide, it gives you a lot of snapshots of the kind of resolution and the kind of features that we're able to pull out and are seeing in this submarine landscape. In the other times that we've been working in, there are all sorts of really wonderful features that are being resolved. But here's a snapshot for ASIAT. And then in the next slide, we as a full team were able to go back and visit last September. So the Greenlanders had done this work in the years before, but we were able to bring these data back in September and sit down with some of the people who had advised on the surveys and with the municipality, and just kind of have the same process of having a conversation about what's important and where we'll change matters, but this time with the new data added. So I hope that you're on municipality interests in shallow water, because I can't see the screen anymore, but here you can see that meeting. And again, it's like field slips we're noting in. Now we can try to quantify where that shallow passageway is, and the municipality needs to decide whether they want to make it more passable, or whether it's good for ships to be going the long way around into Disco Bay. And we are working in all sorts of ways on understanding those data sets. So penultimate slide, the next one, is what are we doing next? So we've been working for 4 years now. We've gathered the data sets, we've kept the conversation going with the towns that we've been working in, and we've had other offshoots to this work, which has been a very strong educational component. We've made some contact with other researchers who can kind of engage in different parts of the project. But our goal now is to take the observations and take the models and take the community response and integrate them all together. So observations were happening mostly within Greenland over the past few years. Models were mostly happening back at desks in New York City apartments. and being able to put all that together with the community is our challenge for this coming year. So you can move along to one slide, but it's just where I say that I'm willing to take questions and talk about this work in your context, because it's really good to get to speak to people who are really thinking about hazards all around the Arctic.
Thanks so much, Kirsty. I looked at the story map real quick, and it is super interesting. And so we have, to start out with, Jack has a question for you. So Jack, if you want to.
Yeah, no, that is a really exciting project, and all the different pieces are fascinating. I was just curious. So one thing that you showed that I was puzzled by is the uplift rates seem to vary a lot on really small scales. Does that, you think, reflecting where the ice sheet is moving mass, or is that like the small scale local geology? I was surprised that it was so noisy in terms of pretty close stations showing quite different rates of uplift.
Yeah, isn't it? And it's all three of the factors that I mentioned fit into that. So in some places, like, yeah, you see some really high uplift on the East Coast, and that's why we wanted to be there. And I have a strong suspicion that there's big geological anomalies there that are quite localized. And then the short distance changes on the West Coast, I think a lot of that is proximity to the present day ice sheet margin, and then what the LGM ice sheet history was in different areas. But yeah, it is very variable, and that is a lot of what's being unpicked here. We did not try to develop our own ice models. We're using published products for those and working with the people who make them. But the specialism that we have in-house is in the solid earth component, and there's really interesting things happening in the mantle. And when you look at the different timescales that your processes are happening on, that can affect what the viscosity actually is of the response. But yeah, the short length scale, I think a lot of that is to do with nuances of ice burden.
I was wondering, with the story map, is that just because it does seem like a really neat general audience resource, and it seems like it would be super useful. Is that something that could be translated into Greenlandic so that it could also be accessible to people in Greenland, or would that be?
Yeah. Oh, that's been such a conversation because at the moment it does have audio embedded in English and Danish and Greenlandic, and that was the way that we addressed trying to make it accessible to as many people as possible, because it seems easier to have somebody say something in their own words than formally translate the written word and stand by that. Because we've been absolutely blessed by the contributions of the Greenlandic geophysicists from the team. But even they, when you're conversant in your discipline in one language and conversant in another language that you maybe don't work in, so translating geophysics into Greenlandic was a challenge, even for a Greenlandic geophysicist. And I really appreciate how they have risen to meet that challenge. But moving to the written word was one that we just didn't have the person power for. So yeah, it would be really great to have written translations. But at the moment, we have run around that by sending slides like these to our collaborators and getting each person to speak over them in their own language. So what I would really love would be to compare the audio for the three different languages from somebody who could really tell me, are we all saying the same thing? Because if you give three people a presentation to speak to, they'll say it differently in their own way as well as in their own languages. But yeah, it's a really nice thing about the versatility of story maps as well, that because they have that multimedia component. There are different, we tried to keep them as visual as possible, but it was really good that we could include people's voices. So as long as you have the bandwidth, you can hear from everybody.
Yeah, I think that's a really great solution to that, finding that common language. So thanks for that. Julian, did you have your hand up? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. I was wondering about the model. Someone mentioned something similar at IGS about Greenland ice sheets and underlying bedrock. And I was wondering, do you see any I guess correlation where the rock type, the underlying rock type as to where the recession of the fjords exist? I'm guessing that if it's, for example, like limestone, a dolomite versus something that is a softer, I don't know, a different type of limestone, do you see that change in the amount of recession, or is it not really an influence if you've seen that?
Well, you touched on a topic that's really near to my heart, because I'm fascinated by how the geology that you can map, how it affects the ice above it, and how it gives you some indication of the mantle that's carried it there. So there are there's beautiful and complicated ways that they relate that I really want to understand, because the ice underneath can control the rock underneath can control heat flux and can control water routing and all sorts of things that affect that past ice history and the future projected one. The relationship between the mantle properties and the mappable surface rock isn't as obvious. They definitely are related to each other. So when there have been events that have changed the mantle properties, or the heat is different, like I'm thinking of the Iceland hotspot, things like that, where there is a surface geology imprint of what's happened at depth. There are relationships there, but they're not simple to map down. You can't look at the surface geology or the solid geology map and know what the mantle is underneath. So for that one, we're really looking at the physical properties and the measured rates and figuring out what it has to be, and then using that to help understand the geology story. Because yeah, they do all link together, but in ways that are even more complicated than these models are taking in.
Thank you.
Kirsty.
Yeah, and then Rainey has a question.
Just really just a comment. I'm helping my mom get ready to head into the Fairbanks North Star Boroughs Senior Recognition Day, and I'm listening, and we were taking it all in, and I was reflecting on what exactly this project, how it would have resonated when I was doing my early oceanography in like 1993 in Greeley, Colorado. And so the reality of the juxtaposition and the data and everything, like, I think it's just awesome. I really do. I think it's terrific. And the dialogue I was sharing with my mom, that if we had proposed then that this work and the phenomena that we're having to work on and the dialogues and the tech, like, it wouldn't have even been a science fiction story at the time. Like, it would have, and so here we are, and we're engaged in it. And I just wanted to take this chance to say I appreciate that. And over these decades, to have a chance to have you all doing all the work that you're doing, and so many others of us that are doing the work that we're doing, I think it's just brilliant. I really do. I really appreciate it. So thank you for it. I'm glad to have caught this today. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you, Kate and the NNA program, and Twyla and everybody who puts this sort of things together. I find it really extraordinary that the physical properties of the mantle and the lived experience of people who live in Greenland can inform each other and inform what we do next. And one of the educational things that we had, and Margie Turin from Lamont, she drives this, and she sent students home to go and talk to their parents and their grandparents about what they had seen in changes around the coast. And it is like it's a real data set to help constrain these sometimes not entirely intuitive processes that are steering the sea level around here. And yeah, it's the sculpting of the NNA program did steer very much the components of work that could be put together in this project, and it's been really amazing.
It's always really exciting for us to hear. Thanks.
There's one, Umberto has one question for you, Kirsty, in the chat, which I'm not sure if you can.
I've been losing that every time I get kicked out.
Yeah, well, and I can follow up with it too. So the question is essentially is if what you presented here is also part of the AGU presentation that yeah, I'm not sure, or if there are any other publications that might be available.
So yes, we have presented this work at AGU as a sort of a cohesive, here's all the parts of the project. So you might have seen a presentation that had voices from each of the people involved. A lot of the publications that are already out are to do with the solid earth modeling. So I did have a list of those that I should have included on the slide, but there's a Paxman every year and a lot of Ostermans as well. And then the bringing it together and writing up each of those, the story of each of the places is what is our mission for the next year. So there will be work coming through that kind of tries to tell the whole story of each place. But at the moment, if you want to read about the cellular component and those advances in the sea level modeling, yeah, it's a lot of Paxman.
Great, thank you so much. Unless there are any other questions, I think we can go ahead and wrap up a little bit early today. I really appreciate our presenters today. And of course, IRPIC for helping facilitate the meeting and for all of you for participating today. It's always great to hear about this work, and especially through this program, that it's been a really great transformative program for doing research in Greenland, which I think we can see. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks for the invite and thanks for everybody's time.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay.